Today. We're going to talk today about geometry. I know we veered away from this for a little bit, but we're going back and we're going to start with lesson 16.1 in topic 16. And so we're going to focus today on the different types of lines. We're going to talk about parallel lines, perpendicular lines, and intersecting lines. So I'll give you some information and then I will tell you where on Power School that you can find more information. So if you want to follow along with me in your books, we're going to start on page 822. We're not going to do the solve and share today, but you are more than welcome to do it on your own if you like. Your homework is listed on the email, but at the end of this, I will give it to you again so that you have it both ways. So let's talk a little bit about lines. The first ones we're going to talk about today are parallel lines. I did an anchor chart for you as well, and it is on Power School, so you can pull that up. You can even print it and put it in your interactive journal if you want to be proactive. Now, parallel lines are lines that will never cross. And we did start talking about these. If you remember, I gave you some examples. For example, parallel lines consist of things like train tracks. And if you notice that they are side by side, but they never actually touch unless they are crossing at a certain point. Another thing that is an example of parallel lines are stripes on the American flag and also plugs that you may have at the end of your electrical cords. But here's a little picture of them, and this is kind of what your anchor chart looks like. They are two lines, and remember, lines go on forever in both directions. So I want you to think about some other things as well, like does a line have a certain number of points? No, because a line goes on forever in both directions, there's an infinite number of points on each one, okay? So that's parallel lines. The next ones that we're going to talk about are perpendicular lines. And if you look here, I do have just an example of what it would look like if you drew it. And perpendicular lines cross to make right angles. And remember, we talked about these in class, if you remember correctly. They are always going to intersect at a right angle, which, if you remember, is 90 degrees. And there are two examples right here for you. But also, some examples of perpendicular lines are where two city roads intersect. They join at right angles to each other, and they form 90-degree angles. So you also, if you have tiles on your floor, the square tiles form perpendicular lines, and they cross to make right angles. So there are some examples for you, and you can try to find as many as you can in everyday life to see how many you can come up with, okay? So perpendicular lines are all intersecting lines, but they intersect at one particular point, and that's at a 90-degree angle. All right, the last one that we're going to talk about today are intersecting lines. And intersecting lines do cross each other, but they don't make right angles. So if you notice, they can cross anywhere on that line, and we call them intersecting because they do cross, but they do not make right angles, okay? Are they all perpendicular? No, they're not, because a perpendicular line is a certain kind of intersecting line. So some examples of intersecting lines, I pulled some for you. You can see some pictures here, like the railroad crossing sign, highways that cross at intersecting points. If you have ever been on Spaghetti Junction here in Atlanta, you've seen some examples of intersecting lines. The lines on a tennis racket, or some lines on street roads, they are intersecting lines. If you notice here where the railroad tracks cross, those are intersecting lines. They do not cross at right angles. So you have lots of examples for you in everyday life. And we're going to do a couple of problems here, a couple of questions here together as kind of our guided practice. But I want you to realize that you guys will do practice as well at home. And then you have your homework that you can do to give you additional practice. So if you remember, what geometric term could you use to describe if I asked you about the top and the bottom edges of a book? Think about what a book looks like at the top all the way across and the bottom all the way across. I'll give you a few seconds to kind of think about that. That's right. Those are parallel lines. What pairs of lines look like the blades on an open pair of scissors? What do you think that would be most like as far as parallel, perpendicular, or intersecting? I'll give you another few seconds to see if you can come up with it. That's right. Those are intersecting because they don't cross at right angles. Great job, guys. Okay, so you have gotten a little bit of information about parallel, perpendicular, and intersecting lines. You are going to do some homework for me today. If you want to do a little bit more practice with the independent practice on page 823, please feel free, 823 and 824. But for your homework today, you guys are going to go to pages 825 and 826. And I'd like for you to do numbers 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, and 15. It's also on PowerSchool. It's also on your email that you got from all of the fourth grade teachers today. But I wanted to come to you live and give you a little bit of information just so that we could talk about it and I can ask you some questions. So now I'm going to ask you a few questions about what you've learned today.